I didn't know that it would be my job to call the meeting to order. That's what I'm doing. I am not Alex Robinson. My name is Peter Eckerman. I'm a history theory faculty here in the School of Architecture, and it is a delight to introduce Alex, my colleague, a linchpin of the, let's say, small but mighty world of landscape architecture and urbanism. Alex is an associate professor here in the school, and really, I think his is one of the most distinctive bodies of work, and really one of the most complex and unusual minds in our midst. Alex thinks extensively about how water moves, what happens when water disappears, what's left behind on land when water, lots of it, is seized, claimed, encroached upon, subjected to unwanted migration, and also what we might do about it. His design perspective on the LA River, really our topic today, and let's just say geography of Southern California in an expanded frame. It's really distinct how it blends aesthetics, techniques, history, futurity, the demands of practice with the speculative license of the seer. He is a committed pedagogue, which I've seen at close range, sharing quite a number of students and having taken part in history reviews these past few years. And he's a scholar of a pretty remarkable range. His 2007 book, Living Systems, Innovative Materials and Techniques for Landscape Architecture, published by Rick Mercer, widely read and respected both by theorists and clinicians. Let me also recommend a very different book of his, The Spoils of Dust, from 2018. The Spoils of Dust, Reinventing the Lake That Made Los Angeles. An investigation into the Owens Valley, published by Applied Research Design, blends history, field study, novel visualizations of the landscape, proposals for its repair, and much else besides. He has received quite a few awards, grants, distinctions. He is a fellow of the American Academy in Rome, which is no small feat. His work has been supported by the Graham Foundation, Foundation for Landscape Studies, Landscape Architecture Foundation, and others. What else? He has a BA from Swarthmore and LA from Harvard. He has 16 years done at USC, if I'm counting correctly. He's worked at some firms you may have heard of, runs an outfit called the Office of Outdoor Research, and has exhibited his work widely as well. Among those venues, I would note the Center for Land Use Interpretation, CLUI, over in Culver City, where Alex is close and ongoing ties, and with which he shares a consuming interest in exploring the American West, a style of work, I don't know, related to what in my field used to be called muddy boots geography, really in the best sense. So today we're going to be hearing primarily about this lab, the Inclusive Infrastructure Design Lab in Elysian Valley, or Frogtown. Whether or not you know Alex already, and whether or not you've found yourself at the lab, as I have 3 or 4 times, you will quickly come to understand that this guy runs deep. He knows things, and understands, and can explain things that other people don't or can't. The lab embodies what makes Alex's work so unusual and I think necessary. It occupies, you will see in great detail, it occupies one of these sort of unclassifiable sites that a lot of people in LA, upon learning of it, might label, oh, actually pretty close to downtown. But in any sane city and region, would be perceived as really quite remote, or politely we could say sort of interstitial, on the margins. It is all of these things. It is a very, very special place in which Alex's talk and body of work will show this whole question of what counts as central or peripheral is actually quite complex. These categories like city and suburb, center and edge, solid and void. Like almost everything else in LA, it sort of depends on how you look at it. Margins as Method is his title today, and indeed, debating or cogitating on this category of margin can itself, as he shows, be productive of new sorts of landscape imaginaries, new politics, new ethics, new angles of intervention. And I think the ability to reflect and speculate in this way is or should be a core competency of any well-tempered Polino, who, amid errant lines, inspectors, totally left with laughs, knows how viscerally we depend on these infrastructures, but also knows enough not to take really any aspect of them for granted. So Alex, in a sense, is our guide to these new natures. And in some ways, we really don't know LA until we know it. So let's get started.
Peter, that was very generous. Best introduction I've ever had. And one of the best I've seen. Thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you for having to participate in this lecture series. So I'm going to give you sort of a general look at what I'm doing, a bit of introduction to who I am, and then get into some of the work that I've been doing at the lab. I think of each of us in the landscape department, we all sort of are in our own little worlds a little bit, so we kind of speak broadly often, so I think that is an advantage to us. So we're not going to get too deep into the jargon, hopefully, but we'll see. So anyway, I'm a landscape architect who spends a lot of time thinking about infrastructure, and I'm thinking about infrastructure as a kind of landscape. And I think that this is something that is really of interest in the discipline. We're thinking about where does a landscape kind of fit inside an infrastructure, or how does an infrastructure become a landscape? And I think what we've seen, is that, especially in LA, the infrastructure isn't just a kind of substructure of our lives. Like, it's not just originally, the original term for infrastructure was about the railbeds of a railway, but it really is structuring our lives in so many ways. And I think that that is something that we've realized, that infrastructure structures our lives, the kind of day-to-day experience of our lives, and it has so much more potential to improve upon that. And there's a lot more opportunity to expand that ability. So if you look at Los Angeles, you see a lot of infrastructure that also becomes open space, that becomes parks. And if you look at the history, you actually see an incredible reliance on infrastructure to make our best park spaces. So Silver Lake Reservoir is a great example. Echo Park Lake, you go back into history and look at the canals that ran through Los Angeles that made it to this kind of Eden that people would describe when they came across the dusty California landscape and arrived in Los Angeles full of all these water canals. And then, of course, the LA River. And then this is a bit of difficult and weird union and problematic, and there's always fights going on about how these two fit together. And so as a landscape architect in Los Angeles, I've been really interested in understanding, this union. How does this come together? How do these two pieces come together? Because you have something that's maybe providing some basic health and safety performance, flood protection, for instance, water supply. And then you're also saying, oh, that should also be a nice place for people to inhabit, to have a life, to live their lives. So I'm interested in, I've also interested who designs these kind of unions, what designs them, how should they be combined? And I've often found the strange truth is that these combinations are not come by design generally. It's often some resilience of landscape agency, some power of landscape to kind of fight through the infrastructure and establish itself and be enshrined by the people that live around it. So strangely enough, this research has led me far afield to the Owens Lake. And I'll go through briefly, I know some people have seen this, but this is a dust control project that became very much a hybrid of the landscape and infrastructure. So this is a lake that was dry by the 1913 Los Angeles Aqueduct, and it produced these terrifying plumes of dust that were extremely dangerous. The worst PM10 particulate pollution in the country was reported here by the EPA. And what happened was very unusual, very surprising, was that this was reinvented. In order to control the dust, they kind of by accident reinvented this lake into a kind of simulacrum of its old self. The LEPWP, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, that was trying to control the dust, they ended up kind of by accident creating this amazing habitat, creating this space that people wanted to go to, and the state laws enshrined all these things. So suddenly they were in a position where they had to maintain all these lake landscape values when they were just kind of trying to stop the dust. So now you go out there and you have amazing bird habitat, like fantastic regional, international bird habitat. You have land art of sorts, overlooks and walkways, and yet that we get to keep, our water in Los Angeles. We still get to take about 50% of our water from the aqueduct, and previously the Owens Lake took all that water. So my book was really trying to untangle the forces at play here, and I sort of realized it was kind of a Ouija board design. Like everyone had their hands on the wheel. No one really knew where this was going, but it went to some really interesting place. It's oftentimes in engineering and landscape. You end up in far more radical places than you could ever design. And I should note that landscape architects did eventually get involved. There was some design, but they really were focused on like overlooks and the edges. They didn't really get to crack into designing the actual vast landscape, what I call the middle ground. It's all this, the most consequential and most contested landscape, all the landscape in between the edges. So the landscape that's providing the real nature habitat, that's really defining most of your experience on the lake. And the landscape that is difficult to design because you don't really, it's going to defy any sort of natural precedent. And the Owens Lake was a perfect case study for really tracking like how this happened, because it was as blank lake as you've ever seen. It was dry and barren, and they built this grid of dust controls on top of it, and you could really track kind of like footprints or tool marks how this was made. What was the kind of forces at play in making this particular landscape? And ultimately, they kind of assembled this kind of like, I see it as a farm for making lake values. So they kind of efficiently make lake values. They're obsessed with making them as efficient as possible. Habitat that's efficient, recreation, air, dust control. And you can look at the kind of forms and understand where it came from by tracking, unpacking this system. And so there were some important lessons, I think, from this study for my work now. One of them was the sway of our embodied relationship to the landscape. Our kind of physical relationship to landscape had a very unusual and surprising sway upon the design of this place. And it came mostly through embodied forms of measurement. And so bird watching is, so you kind of, I expected disembodied dust sensors, kind of like everything happening from satellites, but really it was a lot of people on the ground, air pollution engineers, birders, all sorts of people having experiences on the ground and measuring, and there was that kind of imbricated into their work. So there's a landscape aesthetic shaping this. There was a landscape experience that was relevant to this. And it's a really bizarre landscape to experience. It's extremely flat. It has this really bizarre architecture. You're in the deepest valley, 7,000 feet deep. So it's just a radical place to be. And one example is bird watching. It has incredible influence on this project. Because they built all their dust controls in the cells, they created this lake that was a drive-in lake, which was kind of a new thing. To drive into a lake, you usually got to take a boat. But here at the Owens Lake, you can drive around and easily bird the whole thing, make a record of all the birding that you do, and make a model that's going to determine the next steps to make it more efficient. So there was this kind of, all these different ways in which the experience of the landscape. I mean, birding is a very aesthetic activity that has kind of power of measurement and influence politically. Another example is just the ways in which they would measure the dust and lay out the dust controls. At some point they realized that they had demilitarized GPSs enough so that they could attach them to their ATVs, drive the ATVs around the dust scars, and then send those to the LEDWP. This is the air pollution control engineers. The DWP would build them as they had drawn them with the ATVs. And so there was a very clear link between the two. It's kind of, I was thinking Michael Heitzer sort of presaged this a little bit, but it was weirder than you could imagine, a way to make a landscape, kind of like a land artist fantasy to make a landscape this way, at this scale too. The second thing was that modeling, I realized that modeling was going to be a critical way to do design. that was going to be the critical interface for design. So parallel to my design research, I developed an interface for more intentional and holistic design. So this was where I took all the models that they were using. They were all, each kind of group had a model to represent their ideas and their priorities, and I put them all together, added some landscape representation, and created a unified interface for all those pieces. So you could adjust the water, and it would tell you how much habitat you have, and how much it was costing, and it was borrowing the agency of all those different parties, putting them into one vision, one view. And it was trying to answer this question: where should landscape fit inside this critical infrastructure? When it costs money, when it takes water away from Los Angeles, how do you balance these things? It's a very difficult question to understand, to say yeah, this is how much landscape is worth. And I realized which leads me to my third lesson, which is I realized I couldn't answer that question alone. I needed to engage people on that. And so I built a public interface for this system that was now is exhibited at the Center for Land Use Interpretations trailer in Swansea, right next to the lake, that lets a user engage with it, create a postcard that they can share, and kind of participate in that question. And I realized that was going to be absolutely critical for anything going forward. And this is an exhibit of the stands, and eventually I put all the postcards that people made. I think there was 500 on the graph between sunrise to sunset, so aesthetics, and then water use. Just trying to kind of highlight that conundrum where we have to step in and kind of make difficult decisions, but can we do it with maybe a better representation of the problem? Okay, so getting to the lab, this is a project, of course, that is about creating hybrid landscapes. How do you create an infrastructure that's also a landscape that serves us in multiple ways? It's also about how do you kind of do that in a way that's inclusive, that you acknowledge the political challenge of this problem, and really trying to understand where landscape fits in this really, really critical infrastructure. Which leads me to maybe you guys don't know that much about the LA River. Very short primer of the LA River. Los Angeles was settled here because the LA River was a good water supply, an exceptional water supply in Southern California. But it's a Mediterranean river. It's very wild. It would flood. It's always been a kind of flooding river, so eventually Los Angeles expanded. The strange thing about the river is that we live in a lot of its watershed. So when we hardened the watershed, it created awful flooding, and it was just completely out of control. Los Angeles became infamous for its flood hazards, something we don't remember today. And LA County tried to fix this. They failed. 2 catastrophic floods in the 30s. The federal government came in. They got authorization to do this kind of work, and they had this innovative solution. Encased the whole thing in reinforced concrete, all 51 miles. Turns out it worked in a way. So we have this water freeway. And now, in the last 30 years or more, even before in the 70s, people were thinking, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And so activists have been working to try to undo that or change it. And Louis McAdams was a major force in that. He was a poet who walked the river and started an organization that has been so influential, the Friends of the LA River, which is also an awesome kind of provenance for change. This is hardly a master plan. And then, meanwhile, today, to catch you up, certain portions of the river are totally underperforming, and we're likely to see flooding soon, somewhere, probably in the Glendale Narrows. So speaking of history, one thing that really inspired this project were some photographs that I found when I was working on the Los Angeles River Revitalization Master Plan in 2005 or 6. And I was intrigued by these visual evidence of how people were designing the river. This giant model they were building, it was in Griffith Park. It was a locally built model by the Department of War, now Department of War. The Army Corps of Engineers were doing it. And they were kind of working with the water in such a tangible, beautiful way that I thought was just was so appealing. You know, it was this fun and fast, real-time computation. Put the water in there, and you get the results. And you're sculpting the water, and you're sharing that kind of agency with the water. The engineers and the water are working together. Of course, this is a really problematic thing too. You had like this very exclusive group of people working on it. A couple men pointing at the model, as Peter likes to point out in some of his lectures. And you have a singular focus on hydraulic control, and you've got the result, which is just a concrete monolith, the LA River. But given my experience at Owens, I was like, well, there's so much other potential here, like a kind of missing potential. The model was clearly this powerful exhibit. It mixed engineering authority. It was with a kind of accessibility and a kind of charisma, the science exhibit. I wondered if is this method still relevant? And I asked the engineers. They're like, yes, we need this method. That's how we designed it. We have to do it again. This is actually the most accurate way of designing hydraulics. It's pure physical modeling. All the numerical models are based on this. And I also, clearly this is a great format to make inclusive. This is a rendering done by 2 of my students. They won an ASLA award for this project. But I realized that this could be a common ground, that a space where multiple voices and practices met and were empowered. And this was really coming out of my experience working on the LA River Revitalization Master Plan and thinking like, okay, we're putting all this great work in here, but we're not really addressing the elephant in the room, the hydraulic performance of the system. This is such an intensely high-performance flooding system. What if all the things that we designed are just going to get washed away in the analysis? We don't really know if we've really addressed the concerns. Like, how do we get closer to a solution when we don't know the site boundaries? So how do we integrate, hydraulic parts of this into our process better? I did talk to the Army Corps. They're like, yeah, we're going to just model it all at our place in Vicksburg, our engineering facility in Vicksburg, at the end, at extraordinary cost and at this large scale, but probably almost no flexibility for design at that point, for coming up with innovative solutions. So either that design needs to start baked really basic, or kind of modest, or we're going to kind of end up with, we're going to be at loggerheads. And I was kind of like, what's the chances of that really ending well? Like when we get to this final giant model, are we going to be able to come up with innovative solutions that bend all the boundaries we need to come up with a good compromise? And I think it's important to note that, this idea that we're going to restore the river, revitalize the river, you have to realize that the river that we're going to get, if we improve it, best case scenario, is really going to be different than any natural river. It's going to be something we can't quite imagine, or it's going to be something quite different than what we might think the river should come back to. It's going to have to go somewhere else. It's going to have to be reinvented. One of the reasons is the river acts hydraulically in crazy ways. From a layman's terms, it acts like a fire hose at times, which is not how a river should act. Just the water moves so fast that it kind of jumps between different states. And in the future, we're looking at a scenario where we have to increase flood protection. But we'd like to increase flood protection even without climate change. We also want to have nature-based solutions, which we don't really know how to do. The place we know how to do it is in the Glendale Narrows, but this place is probably going to flood because of that vegetation, partially, unfortunately. So we're studying actually what that vegetation does. Anyways, it's very difficult to needle the thread. How do we execute a kind of integrated innovation where we're innovating on multiple fronts? We're making new kinds of nature, new kinds of flood protection, and probably new kinds of parks. Because none of those can really conform to an old model. We have to maybe get to a new place in all those realms. And I really think the problem is a little bit perverse, and which makes it interesting. The harder and more technical the infrastructure problem, which the LA River is very technically hard to model and represent, the more imagination you need, and the more innovation you need. And then if you really come up with a really innovative solution, everyone might be like, what is that? I don't get it. You know, like that's not an actual recognizable landscape. So maybe you have to kind of innovate what landscape looks like and what people would accept as landscape. So it's this kind of like, there's all these different margins, what I call margins of method. I'm working at the margins. We're trying to work at the margins of the hydraulics, of what public space is, what nature is, and see if we can put those all together and kind of push at all those different boundaries to come up with a new solution. Because in the end, we probably can't make it look like, we're not going to make it look like a regular river. You know, it's not going to, we're going to have to change what people want, expect or imagine this would be. So to address this problem, you know, I've been working, plodding away at this for a while. 2013, I built some little models with the Army Corps in the city of Los Angeles, here in Mott, right, in that corner space. And while I was doing that, the city was like, hey, we have a hydraulic analysis laboratory, check it out. And I was like, great, can I use it? And then like, you know, 5 or 6 years later, maybe 7 years later, they were like, we've come to an agreement, you can use it. It was a long process, but we have an MOU, and we're actually just redoing the MOU for another 5 years. We're about to sign it. Anyway, so this lab is perfectly equipped for doing hydraulic modeling because it hasn't changed that much. We added some tools to fabricate, so we're not just using plexi. But anyway, what's amazing about this lab is it's right next to the LA River. They've never modeled the LA River here. It's a perfect spot for us to do this project. So really a bit of serendipity. Los Angeles has some serendipity here and there, you know, big city. And so we were, what's ironic is that we can't actually get to the river except by walking 2 or 3 blocks in either direction. But that's Los Angeles too. And there's a bridge there, a pedestrian bridge. But anyway, we have this spot, and it just so happens that it's right next to the parcel that the city of Los Angeles purchased to do their big splashy revitalization. They spent millions of dollars and bought the G2 parcel, Taylor Yard, to do a radical revitalization and modification of the channel. And so they were encouraged, Deborah Weintraub really championed us, the city engineer, to do this project and help us get the lab. So we'll get back to that parcel a little bit. I'm just going to introduce you to some of the pieces of the lab. A little bit of boilerplate, but you know, this is our mission. You know, we're looking at creating, you know, working with communities to create, you know, improvements, create nature-based infrastructure, and we believe that all these pieces need to come together, not because they should, but because they have to. That politically, there's no way forward. There's no technical way forward unless those pieces come together. What do we do at the lab? We do lots of different things. We develop design tools, research, applied design, which is a new exciting part of our project, public education, and we do field investigations, which we are really ramping up. One of the great things about starting a project during COVID is that I could spend a lot of time talking to people and inviting people to join us, and they were happy to talk about it. So we've expanded the team from Tool and Andreas, who are kind of the core team. We've really expanded that team with a lot of different people. We've had lots of students work there. One great thing is I enticed Public Exchange to work with us, and they're an amazing organization. You can look them up, and they basically try to connect academics to real-world improvements, like to agencies, and kind of fulfill, you know, help the public good through that. So right now we have a bunch of different agreements and memorandums. Lauren Bond was actually a critical funder at the beginning. USC has given us two really big grants, the Sustainability Initiative and the Provost Strategic New Directions. And we've gotten grants from the NEA, from the state, other people, so it's been really a diverse group of funders. We also started the Los Angeles River Observatory, which I'm really excited, and I can talk a lot more about this at a time, but basically we're looking at how do we measure the landscape, rather, what do we need to measure in the landscape to design? So a lot of the things that we measure about the LA River is regulatory and doesn't help you design it. So right now we're working to get a Safe Clean Water Program project to study the vegetation in the LA River carefully in terms of how it improves water quality. So we're working with a French real-time water quality sensing firm to measure that vegetation, classify it, drones, and all these sort of things, so that we can understand it as a nature-based infrastructure that it already is. So that's the example of if we're going to design flood protection with vegetation, we need to understand how vegetation works in there. So this is what the observatory is trying to do, and we're doing lots of things. And obviously, I'm not the expert in this, so I work with my colleagues a lot about how and what to measure. So the design tooling is an important part of our project. We've been spending a lot of time in the last couple of years building our design tools, and the basic question, which I think you've kind of already seen, is how do we have an inclusive design tool for the river that that addresses the technical side of things, the engineering side of things, that also brings people into the mix, that empowers their voices. And one of our hypotheses is that we can do this by creating this integrated engineering tool that is inclusive, that is charismatic, that brings people in, and that we can use that to really design the river together and address these problems together. So we built this large hydraulic model. So it's a 60-foot long model. That's the scale of the model, but add 60 feet to it. And it's a rather large thing to build. It's like a giant deck with lots of deck and another deck on top, and there's a kind of crazy thing to do. And we can simulate 100-year flood events. So this is a PBS, a little thing about showing side by side the actual footage and flood in our river. So if you want to see what the river looks like at a 100-year event, you can come by and visit. We can show you, and we can work with that scale of flooding. We can remove pieces. We have a CNC mill, little one. One thing that was really a great question was how do we show the right amount of context on this model? I give my students a hard time all the time. Where's the context? And we realized we couldn't put a lot of context, but then we couldn't get to the model. It was in the way. So we decided we would do this kind of poetic ergonomic context, which is the sycamore rail, urban salvage sycamore. It's a riparian wood, and we put all the information that we could in that little rail as a kind of token for that. But in addition to that, we also worked with the cinematic arts professor to develop an augmented reality system. We realized we could maybe just put everything we want on top of the model using augmented reality. And so this system, you can overlay information. We have these videos are updated, but we put we have a cultural asset mapping project with a local arts organization. You can put the interviews and other information on top of the model. We can put any kind of map we want on the model. We have a whole set of constraints that we put on the model with this. And then also we have the tools for drawing in three dimensions on the model. We can post comments. So potentially we've had stakeholders come in and put a comment. That comment, becomes part of our retinue of inputs as we're, changing the water, redesigning the river. So we try to make that connection between a community member and the design, the actual technical engineering design. And yeah, of course, we had to do this because the physical is so powerful, has a powerful bias. How do you kind of break that down a little bit? One of the things I'm really proud about is MLA students really led this charge is the pick-and-place vegetation. These are all silicon pieces and 3D printed trees with magnets. Usually you don't represent vegetation like this in hydraulic models, so it's unusual to see this kind of specificity. We have different kinds of vegetation. We can move them around. We kind of create this innovative system that has to, it's really a difficult representational problem. It has to look good. It has to be hydraulically representative of roughness according to the engineer's specs. It has to be recognizable in the cameras that we have overhead. So just really nerdy model stuff. But we made hundreds or maybe thousands of them. I lost track. And then we do a drone scan of the river, process that scan, and then we have a scroll that Andre, my current lab manager, designed that set out all the vegetation according to that drone scan, so we can do seasonal vegetation. We also have rapid prototyping systems, fast, maybe faster, or we can like redesign the river, physical river without remilling everything, which is a lot of time. So we have, this is like this is inspired by Hunter and Andre, if you know what this is. This is an old era street snake made into a river model design. So it's kind of, anyway, if you're not familiar with that, check it out. And then there's like a metal, anyway, we can adjust it. That's the main point. We have an overhead camera system that does a lot of different work for us. One thing we did realize is that we couldn't do the physical modeling alone, so we worked with an engineer who has a really innovative system for modeling with the GPU. It has really fast hydraulic modeling. So we worked with this engineer, and also it's like interactive and all these different things. It's a really cool system. We modified it from coastal habitats, and so this has become an integral part of our process. So just a little bit about the projects and some conclusions to wrap up. We have a couple different projects that we're working on right now. Unfortunately, I can't really share my most exciting project because we haven't officially announced it. So I'm just giving you some teasers on it, but we've worked on the cultural asset mapping, but this and some other things with the observatory. But this first project was the real project that we had really wanted to work on when we started the lab. We wanted to help the design of this parcel. And so there was a project, that island proposal that was proposed and approved by the city, and then it just stalled out. And so the landowners came to us and they were like, you guys like difficult problems. Seems like you're set up to do it. Can you solve this problem for us? Can you find a way that we can make a meaningful hydraulic connection to this site and find a way forward for this site? You know, that is more than just kind of superficial. Can we connect the river into this site? So this is the site. It's a really crazy site. And we started to work on that, and the reason why it was stalled was just this extraordinary constraints, like head-shaping constraints. Like the power lines, the pollution, historic resources, and each of these people kind of having their own, wanting exactly what they wanted, no compromise, and the high-speed rail is coming through here, maybe. And anyway, it goes on and on. Hydraulic concerns also, they didn't really know how it would work. They didn't ever come up with a viable hydraulic design. So we started working on it, and we first started with the Solaris model, and we go through a dozen or 24 iterations using the Solaris model, trying to find solutions that are going to reduce the flooding. That was our goal, which isn't part of the actual master plan these days. It's like, keep it as is, that's what they say. We want to improve the flood protection. And so we noticed there's flooding happening here. So in this scenario, we do reduce the flooding. We managed to find a way to do the island. This leads to physical modeling. We flood the model all the time, shoes are wet all the time when that's running. We're trying to find how to make this work. And the model is much more rigid, but also like kind of more fluid in its ability to kind of mess around. So we're throwing a piece of plexi in there, pushing the water into the channel, seeing where the flooding changes. We bring people over and they're kind of like, they see something because it's just so accessible. We have all sorts of students and other folks that really are just able to surprise us with something interesting to say about the model. We also have great stakeholder meetings with this. So it's been really a great kind of tool. So we've developed 3 iterations, 3 basic designs that could all happen. Each has a kind of pilot project version. 2 of them needed physical modeling. The third one was a different approach. One of the schemes was parabolic vegetated terraces. So we're looking at, I think we've sort of thought a little bit more about what terracing could be, how a pilot project could work. One of the things that we're excited about is this potential for sloping terraces so that you have continuous access, because that's something that's amazing about the trapezoid walls, is that you can climb down into the river, you climb out if you're in trouble, and you have this kind of gradual ramp into the river. So what if it was all just kind of ramped along the side? So we have more final versions of this, but anyway, we'll share them eventually. So where's this project going? I think it's going to continue. That's what we hope. We're still working it out. We also have been asked to maybe model another river in LA County, so that's exciting. And we've got a lot of projects with the LA River Observatory going forward. And lastly, I just want to mention just like what does it mean to work with this kind of representation? It's been fun, just plus a lot of tools. What about people engaging with it? Like, it has had that kind of power. Like, it really brings people there. People come. I give tours a couple times a month. We have high school students come regularly in different groups. We do different sessions with them. We have all just different academic groups. We have different brats coming by, checking it out. It's really like they want to see it. And people say, oh, it's like the Exploratorium. I'm like, great. If we can make people excited about this, kids love it. They come here. We're in the neighborhood. We like to we want to stick around. We want to have a long-term influence and really just kind of like build a kind of soft power, I think, about doing something, a consensus, a familiarity with what this problem is, and ability maybe to think a little bit differently. The other thing is that I do think that there's something really fun about the kind of scale perspective that we have. We're all like, if you stand on the model, you're between 350 to 400 feet above the river, like a drone scale. And it's immersive, and there's sort of a thing I think is a little bit different than an average community meeting where we're all looking at drawings and half the people understand what the drawings are and what they mean, and half really understand what they are. Here, I feel like everyone's, for maybe a minute or two, is like looking at the same thing. Like there's kind of this stability and accessibility to understand this problem together. And I think that calms people down, and there's a different conversation that happens. There's less confusion, and there's, I think, less interest in just thinking like, am I represented? Because I don't understand what you've done. They're like maybe, oh, we can talk about maybe the way forward here. So I think there's power to that I didn't expect. The last thing I would say is that we've had these really fun workshops with an artist from Clock Shop, Aqua Costera, where she's done these 2 workshops. She did one with finger puppets and stop motion animation. And she did one with tack decks, which are finger skateboards. And then they made a movie with it. And we had these amazing workshops, and it was kind of like, it just was like very cool to see the model being used not as a kind of instrument, not to make choices, but just a landscape for community, for life, for imagination. And the water and the hydraulics were just another powerful character in the story. Thank you. We have time for a few questions.
How have you navigated the political politics of the river? Yeah, how do you try to stay as neutral as possible so that you will continue to be resourced, or do you take a stand?
Yeah, we don't pick fights, So we haven't really had a situation where I felt like, oh, we need to like really back down, or it's just there's a lot of it's a sine wave to how the intensity of it. So like I don't think we've really been at I've seen much more intense moments where we have to like make a more position, and I don't think we're kind of at that point. Like a lot of people working together. The Gary thing is kind of not as controversial. Like Jessica's doing a great job with her master plan. The county wants to like maybe take over the river, but we're working with the county and the city, and like maybe we're kind of helping them talk to each other. So it hasn't really been an issue, but we do sort of like, it's nice to be like, oh, it's student work, it doesn't matter. But now we're kind of not, it's not just student work, so we're like waiting to see what happens. Maybe it will be more controversial.
Thanks so much for the presentation. What role would you say is your desired end goal through this? Is it policy change? Is it implementing new forms of collaborations you've made? And is it scalable, or could you imagine other kinds of landscapes at the margin that would benefit from this approach as well? Could you transport it to other contexts, methods that would be
I mean, I'd love to see something that, like, I mean, it's, you know, there's a lot of, it's humbling to work on the LA River. Like, you kind of just have to lose any sort of kind of ego about, like, I'm going to get this thing built. You know, it's more like, maybe I could start a fire over here, and or that's not a good way to say it, but like, you know, like I could start something here, I can catalyze something, you know, like, and so, but I'd love to see like something built, something, I'd like to see when we have to, you know, I see a potential future like the Altadena fires, where we have a catastrophe and we realize we need to change this river. I don't know if we're gonna make a change before that, I'm not sure. And I want to see us in a position where we can do it in a way that's better than we did last time. You know, like that has all, we have the tools and the ability to do that. Ideally though, my like shorter term thing is I'd love to build a pilot project. That's probably the best I could hope for. Where we do make some chink in that concrete armor. And then in terms of scaling it, like, yeah, I think there's potential for it. Yeah, I think so, for sure. I haven't thought, like, I totally think it's possible. And you could do it on coastal stuff too, you know, I think there's lots of potential. I think this is, sometimes I'm like, oh, I just made this very, like, eccentric thing, this physical model for this one place. Is that, but I think it's kind of like blossoming. There's many roads that lead from it.
Where else is it transported?
Yeah, we've had people talk to us about the saltancy, and like, you know, there's different ways in which we can go in our world, but then also I think there's other coastal things. Yeah.
At some point early in the river, some people talked about the anticipated lifespan of the current river is. Do you have any insight on, like is there a period where this has to change? Because the infrastructure has outlived its lifespan.
I haven't heard anyone say that. I mean, a few people talk about this is aging infrastructure. It's gonna like eventually break down, but it's really doing a good job of sticking around. It's very strong. It's not showing a lot of cracks. So no one's really studied that, but I think that's interesting to know. Yeah. And then there's obviously confusion about what the standard is for flood protection. Should be, no one really has a good answer, I think, about what flood this should be able to accommodate. So if we got to that point, that's a whole other thing. And there's some really exciting kind of new movements, I think, in terms of like combining the technical and the physical, the landscape parts, like the California Environmental Framework project that for the water is bringing all the people together and trying to make a model that's the whole river and like really kind of work in a more integrated fashion.
Yeah, I was really interested in when you were talking about how you're attempting to change what we understand as like a potential river, what it looks like, or what we expect out of it. I was hoping you could kind of talk about some projects. You briefly mentioned the terracing, but some projects that maybe were proposed either by you or your students that maybe dreamy, maybe even practical, but maybe different ideas that have been proposed to kind of expand our understanding of what could happen.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you know, like it's a little backdoor, but like I think that Glendale Narrows is like an interesting example of like adapting to a pretty weird landscape, you know, and like we have really embraced that landscape, kayaking on it, go up there. So that sort of like gives me hope that we can like think of new places. There's lots of problems with it, but I mean, I think some of the terracing work is kind of like interesting in that regard, but I don't think I have a good answer for you right now. Thank you. Good question.
The cross-section of stakeholders and the artists that you had come in
on the model itself, do you anticipate this becoming a catalyst for interdisciplinary community action or sparking that conversation and getting as many different kinds of people involved as possible?
Yes, that's exactly what we'd like to do. And we just actually, the landmark, the really important part about our new MOU is that we can bring in more than 12 people. So that was been a real limiting factor in everything we've done. So now we can bring in like 40 people. Because it's not really designed to be a public outreach space. So I think that doing that kind of stuff, that kind of programming is what we try to do, and we haven't maybe quite made that link to really, coalescing. But we work with this great arts organization called Clock Shop, and they do awesome stuff, and they've really made that possible, and they're connected to all the community members. And it's really been amazing to be in that community with the model next to this full-scale model right there. Last question.
So if we want to take a tour, we want to see the model in action, we just go through the rock stuff?
No, you can talk to me.
What's this model?
Yeah, we should have a tour. I'd love to set up a tour for USC. We'll run the model. You guys can get your hands, but or your feet.
Both.
Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone.